of liability insurance, which protects you as the member for bodily injury and property damage claims that might be brought against you because you own or lease or borrow a horse. If you're a coach and you have students who come to your facility, or if you go to their facility, again, that commercial general liability insurance policy that we may provide you provides bodily injury and property damage coverage. So if somebody falls off the animal and gets seriously injured and they decide to sue you as a professional in the space, you have this commercial liability policy. Again, there's no specific reference in there to COVID. They're not going to, the insurer is not covering the coach for spreading the disease. The insurance policy is not covering the individual member for spreading the disease. Those things, frankly, are not insurable to the best of my knowledge, and certainly were not anticipated by any insurer on the planet. Finally, facility operators, those that are operating boarding places or other commercial enterprise where they're inviting the general public to come to their space, really no different an environment than the food store, the drugstore, or anyone else who has their doors open at this point in time. And here in Ontario, where I am, it's been very much a revolving door about what is open and what's not. But again, those service providers are anticipating sort of the same coverage from their insured that they've had previously. What I will say, which is a bit of a contradiction of what I've just said, is that since COVID was introduced to the globe, and certainly here in Canada, the insuring companies that provide coverage here for both personal insurance and commercial insurance have all, to the best of my knowledge, without exception, made a very clear exclusion in their policies now to say, if you ever even anticipated that bodily injury, as it's referenced in these policies and has been referenced in these policies for decades, was going to protect you for contracting or giving off the virus, the answer is no. So the exclusion is now embedded. It's across the planet. Insurers, frankly, have been drafting and redrafting their exclusions for these last 12 months. And as recently as yesterday, I received yet another bulletin from yet another insurer who's tightened up their exclusion so that there's just no debate that commercial enterprise facility owners, in our case, who are allowing boarders to come to their facility, who are allowing students to come to their facility, and so forth, are not covered for COVID. So the question then is, well, if I'm not covered by any of this insurance, what am I supposed to do? I still have to run my business, or perhaps in some sort of a modified form. I still have to get these horses exercised. And that seems to be a universal question that we're hearing literally from coast to coast. And I was not being facetious when I've said I've probably done a couple of hundred of these meetings over this last year. And by and large, it's been to audiences like this that contain people that are enterprise operators in the horse industry, who all have exactly the same concerns, not only from an income stream interruption, because they're not able to do the things that they were doing before COVID, but frankly, they've still got this massive responsibility of taking care of these 1,000-pound critters we call horses, who frankly don't care whether COVID exists on the planet. They still have to get hay, and they still have to have water, and they still have to have exercise. So over these last 12 months, depending on the jurisdiction, and I know this is true in New Brunswick, there's been recognition about essential caregivers for animals who are being housed, in our case, in the horse industry. And frankly, the same basic premise is being applied to folks that operate kennels or catteries, who have animals in their care, custody, and control, or zoo environments where, again, these animals still have to be maintained by us as humans. And so there's been some recognition about an essential care capacity that has to be acknowledged and facilitated by these operators. And then the question invariably comes up, well, who's an essential caregiver? Well, I think it's fairly obvious that it would be a veterinarian, a farrier, the person who's throwing the flake of hay or filling up the water bucket each day or multiple times during the day at the facility. Does the boarder necessarily need to come to see their horse to provide that essential care? That's been an interesting sort of discussion over these last 12 months, because frankly, some boarders will contest that the facility is not capable to provide the care that the horse may require, specifically medications that might be being administered by the boarder, the owner, or some other rehab after an injury, or some other thing that the facility is not doing for them. And I would argue that that's probably quite legitimate. What I don't think is legitimate, just from a guidance perspective, is the boarder who's bored, who wants to go and see their horse. I think it's fair for me to say, as a horseman of my whole life, the horse doesn't care if the boarder shows up. The horse is going to be just fine as long as it's got a flake of hay thrown at it and some water, and doesn't really care who throws it at him. So it's about this whole notion of who's providing the essential care and what constitutes essential care. What again has been agreed to, I think, in most jurisdictions, and I suspect in Brunswick is the same, is that horses do require exercise. They are, after all, quadrupeds. They do require to move around. We all know the health benefits of being out on pasture when they can be. We all know the benefit of exercise to prevent colic or mitigate it, because these horses have guts that need to be moved around. And horses out in free environments will always graze a little bit, move a little bit, graze a little bit, move a little bit. That's just a natural health sort of thing for them to do. So when we contain them, when we keep them in the barn for such extended periods of time, that's not healthy for them. I think everyone would agree. So does the horse need exercise? Of course it does. Can the boarding facility provide that exercise? Maybe, and it would depend entirely on the boarding place and the professional in charge, whether or not they have the capacity to lunge horses, turn out horses, do the horses as maybe necessary to exercise them. I've been telling this story for a year now, but frankly, I had a thoroughbred horse that frankly could not be turned out. She was nuts, and frankly never learned how to be a horse as a baby. She was always in a pre-race sort of environment, and then she came to me. So she never really learned how to be out in a herd. We tried and tried and tried, just couldn't do it. So there's a horse, perfect example where that horse could not be turned out. Frankly, was not great on the lunge line. She was a pussycat under tack. So if I still owned that horse today, I would certainly be arguing with the facility to say, I need to see this horse and I need to tack it up and I need to go for a ride. And I'd argue with any police officer or judge in the land to show why that's true. But those are exceptions. Again, most horses are probably okay kind of doing a little bit of exercise. We don't need to be keeping them show fit at this point. It's fair to say that in New Brunswick, like everywhere else, horse shows are probably somewhere out in the future, and we sure hope everybody gets back to some activity, but it's not going to be anytime really soon. So the level of fitness of these animals needs to be managed. I know I've gone on already for 12 minutes, Deanna, so I'm going to tidy this up. But one of the things that I wanted to speak to was if a facility is going to allow for folks to come to the farm, we get asked all the time about risk forms, waivers, some people call them. We call them acknowledgement of risk forms, more technically. And really, what I would say to you all is, yes, those forms do need to be signed. But now, again, partly because of these insurance exclusions that are occurring, partly because of the presence of COVID globally, and because we all know about it, no one can say they didn't know about COVID, I don't think at this point, the forms have been modified. And the forms have been modified to sort of identify the inherent risks about being around horses, that you can get kicked and bitten and so forth. And if you fall off, you really might get hurt or you might die. Excuse me. But now those forms have been modified slightly so that they acknowledge that, and frankly, or they sort of lay out that at the facility that is asking to have these forms signed, the COVID may be present. There may be a communicable disease that you can't see, you can't touch, you can't smell on the site, and that the signer is going to take some responsibility of their own health, that they acknowledge that that risk may be present, and is signing a form saying, I'm not going to sue you if I get sick. And that's a very important sort of it's a very small clause in the form now. If you don't have those forms and want to get those forms, we've actually posted them, I believe, on the NDA website more than once, Dee. But if not, then people are welcome to reach out to the NBEA. They'll reach out to me. We'll get them posted. In fact, I'll make a commitment that we'll get them posted on the NBEA website because they're useful forms. It's now just a recognition of where we are in 2021. I think that everybody sort of has to take a breath and say, well, we're going to come out this the other side, and it'll be sooner than later. I think we've gone through the worst of it, I hope, in terms of length of time. But I'm going to guess that it'll be summertime before we get out to sort of ride in a group. Very last thing I'll speak to is this. Coaches ask us all the time whether or not they can host lessons or go to barns to give lessons. And Charity's going to speak to this in just a moment, but certainly here and in most jurisdictions where lockdowns have been the sort of the mantra, at least interimly or on a revolving sort of scale over these last 12 months, lessons in and of themselves are taboo. They're a no, they're a hard no. And they should be a hard no, because frankly, it's not just about the fact that the coach is then inviting someone to leave their home, therefore go from point A to point B, which invariably means stops along the way at the gas station or the tack shop or some other place, or on the way to and from the barn. But frankly, there's an element of injury risk here. It's not just about COVID. And certainly the health officials that I've spoken to, and I have spoken to many in most jurisdictions, the reality is that they're terrified that people are going to get hurt and have to go to the hospital and take up a bed that might otherwise be necessarily needed for COVID. And certainly if I was still riding very actively or competitively, I'd be surely taking a very safe view of what my activity looks like at this point so that I don't end up in hospital. And frankly, I don't want to be in that environment. If I can avoid it, it makes sense to avoid it. And there's never been a more sort of important time to try and avoid it. So it's about trying to avoid other injuries that might land you up in the hospital or your student land up in a hospital. It's about people traveling from point A to point B and congregating. I ran a barn, I've run a school, I've been a coach, I've been a facility manager, and it's virtually impossible to stop people from congregating. They all know each other, they're friends, they're pals, they show up in the tack room at the same time. Again, it sort of beats up on this principle of separation. And facilities are taking an enormous responsibility by allowing those people to come under any circumstances. They need to social distance, they need to put signs up, they need to sanitize surfaces, which is really tough in a barn. I mean, what are you going to do? Sanitize the cross ties every time a boarder leaves the building? And I've got lots of facilities who are saying, you know what, right now, I just don't want you at the barn. I've got an elderly parent at home. I've got a small child at home. I don't want to get sick. If I get sick, now we're in real trouble. We can't look after your horses. So please stay away and trust me to look after your animal if that's appropriate. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of discussion about what COVID is and how to manage it in our equine environment. Very last thing, and I've said this 3 times, but the last thing I'll say is this. I do have some coaches who are saying, look, I'm not going to provide a lesson, but what I will provide is some sort of supervision for that rider to ride their own horse. So again, we're not talking about schoolies getting out, unless the schoolies really need a bunch of exercise, which is highly unlikely. But more to the point that if a boarder says, I've got to come up and ride this horse, he's that thoroughbred that I was just describing that frankly does only what he should do under tack, and I've got to ride him. Coaches has every reason then to stand in the middle of the ring to make sure that that horse and rider is safe. But the focus has got to be on the horse's welfare, not on the sit up straight with your heels down kind of a lesson environment. We've just had, we're still in a lockdown here in Southern Ontario, and I had a call over the weekend on my cell phone on the 24-hour line. Somebody was standing in front of a bylaw officer. She had followed some guidance, but somebody had driven down the road, seen too many cars at the barn, and phoned the officer, and the officer showed up, and he was ready to write a ticket. And that ticket was $10,000 because there's a commercial enterprise, and they had a bunch of cars there. It took a lot of explaining, and we helped along the way to say to that officer, look, this is a scheduled environment. They followed all the protocols and the guidance according to the health authorities. This is not a lesson environment. This is a coach, a professional, horse professional, doing their job to make sure that a rider stays safe while that horse is being exercised. And they're focusing on the horse. They're not schooling. They're not teaching a technical skill. They're not trying to improve skills at this moment in time. They're exercising the horse for its health and welfare. And the cop went away. But it was an argument. My point is, we have to be extremely careful how we interact with clients in any environment. And in the horse environment, coaches and pros and facility managers are going to start having to, or probably already have had to make a lot of tough choices about how they allow folks to come to the barn. Now, with that all being said, I'm going to turn it over to Charity. She's been doing some research in New Brunswick over these last several days to find out some of the current regs as they apply. So over to you, Charity.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everybody for the warm welcome. I'm really excited to be here in New Brunswick and hoping that I get to be on the ground and meet a lot of you at upcoming events once we get the COVID situation under wraps. I have done a little bit of research in the last couple of days. It's incredibly difficult with our government and all of the different resources that we have available to us to get some common language But I have been able to come up with the recovery levels and what that means for equestrian activities. I believe NBAA was successful in getting very similar language. So for us, that we are currently zones 1, 2, and 3 in the red levels. That means organized sports are closed. Exercising alone or with a person in your bubble is permitted. So if you are a person who has your own facility, exercising your own horse or a boarder's horse would be fine, with a daughter or a son that lives with you that's in that bubble. But not having boarders come and ride their own horses wouldn't be allowed. With the orange phase that is in zone 5, 6, and 7, physically distancing, skills and drills, which would be practicing within a single team, would be permitted. So no shows. And with an operational plan, which I'll talk to those in a little bit here, that meets recreational and sport directives. As well, there's the yellow phase, and teams can play with an operational plan that meets recreation and sport directives. So if you have an operational plan, if you're a show, a barn, a facility, a coach teaching at other facilities, you need to have that operational plan. And if you think of that as a risk management tool for your business, that protects you and your family and your students. So we have zone 4, which is in lockdown, which means we can't do anything in zone 4 right now. You can ride your own horse, you can tend to the animals that you're boarding, but that is very restricted at this time. I'm really hoping that in the next couple of weeks, we'll see some return to orange and yellow levels, but that's up to COVID and its path. So in that, speaking with operational plans, if you go to WorkSafe MB, and I will post the link in the comments to the Facebook Live post on the MBAA Facebook site, there is a document called Embracing the New Normal. And what this document is it's a guide that helps you through some of the key areas to consider when assessing the risks surrounding the safe opening and continued operations of your workplace or business. So having an active screening process developed and followed will also be key in compliance and prevention. And just as a virus can mutate, guidelines and screening processes related to COVID-19 can change. And as an employer or business owner, you are responsible for keeping that up to date on current guidelines and change your plans as required. Refer to the New Brunswick Public Health and WorkSafe NB websites for updates that may affect your workplace. Operational plans do not need to be submitted, but you do need to present them if you are visited by a WorkSafe NB representative or public health authorities. So the operation template also provides some really great information bulletins, FAQs, as well as links to signage and posters that you can use for your workplace and business to support your operational plan. And I will add the link for those documents to the Facebook Live in the comment section for you. And I hope that this helps to provide some helpful information for you. And as I mentioned, the floor is always moving with COVID-19. And as we move through this process, the importance of keeping yourself up to date is key in maintaining your operational plans, your risk management strategy for yourself and your boarders or students, and everybody's safety. So thank you so much. That's all the research that I had. And I'm just really grateful to be here and thankful that I get to meet everybody. And it's been lovely to speak with the coaches that I've gotten to speak with so far. And everybody have a great night. Back to you, Deanna or Nancy.
Great, thanks, Charity and Mike. So I think at this time we'll take some questions. Nancy, are we taking them by Zoom or by typing them in, or what's the protocol for taking the questions? Take yourself off mute there for a minute.
Yeah.
So how would you
I have some coming in via chat, so I'll start with those.
Sure.
The first one is from a coach, and she says, if we are mandated to not teach for a significant amount of time, I think it's been a month to date for some of our coaches, will this be reflected in coaching insurance premiums?
Not so much on the individual circumstance, Nancy, and I'm not trying to be evasive. If that coach wants to reach out to us and we insure them, then we can have a discussion. These policies are issued on a 12-month basis, and I appreciate that we're already into week 3 or 4 of 2021. Depends on when the coach renewed or didn't renew their policy and what activities other than the direct riding instruction that they may be insured for that may also be contributing to the premium. So it's not an easy answer to give. We're doing our best to try and find a way to credit where we can. Lloyd's of London, who provides the insurance, is not as charitable, shall I say. And it's very difficult to sort of evaluate the risk exposure in a very short period of time, like a month. What we were able to do, frankly, in 2021, which sounds a little trite at this point, is hold the premiums well below the mandated increase that Lloyd's was looking for due to the presence of COVID across the country. So some work is being done behind the scenes, and we're certainly advocating for those costs to remain low. Anyway, if the coach wants to reach out, we'll happily have a discussion directly.
Sounds good. I'm looking at our Facebook Live comments. There's a couple of questions here. Let's see. Someone asks, if you can't sue for COVID, why do we have to sign all that paperwork? Wouldn't trace paperwork do the job if an outbreak should occur? Well, again, that risk form that we were speaking to is there's actually a couple of forms, and if you do go to the MBA website tomorrow, and I'll post them early in the morning, so that you can have a look at them. And the guidance we're getting from lawyers and from others who are in the field is that these COVID forms, like any risk form, are part of a risk management practice, are part of a risk management strategy. Having someone sign a form every time they come to the barn may sound incredibly difficult to do, but these are very difficult times. And if they did contract the virus at your facility, and if you're not insured, what are you going to say in front of the judge when that person makes that assertion that you were the responsible environment and didn't do enough to protect them? Because that's what the allegation is going to say. Whether or not they can prove it is an entirely different discussion, and not one that we're going to be able to answer here tonight. We're not a court of law. But those allegations are already coming forward across the country, indeed around the world. And facility owners that are inviting people to the public, inviting members of the general public to their facility. The tracing is part of it, absolutely. But those COVID forms saying, I understand that there are risks of being here. That's really what it's about. And I'm taking that risk myself. And I'm not going to burden you with being extraordinarily, beyond the pale in terms of keeping me safe. If you've done what is reasonable and you can prove it, and that person signed a form, then you would have a reasonable defense in a court of law. So that's why those forms are important. Paper trail counts. And these are extraordinary times. So extraordinary paperwork is going to be required. It's as simple as that. That's looking like all of our questions, apart from Jose, who wants this summarized in French for her, and we'll do the best we possibly can for you, Jose. I think that's it. Deanna, do you want to wrap this up for us?
Sure, that's great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us this Sunday evening. All of our members, like I mentioned earlier in the call, we're trying to kind of make this start happening every Sunday night, bring the experts in. Mike will be joining us again next Sunday to talk about coaching in general, why it's important to get involved in the coaching family, and try to bring in some experts and fill the void with some information that's needed. We're all kind of stuck inside on cold Sunday evenings and all over Canada. We're not traveling the world like sometimes we do. So it's a good opportunity for us to come together. And as I've said, try to get some more information right from the horse's mouth, which is supposed to be correct, and keep our members informed correctly. That's our goal. I'd like to thank Mike King and his colleague Charity for sharing their time with us this evening, and all of the membership. So please join us again next Sunday, and we can find some other great information to share with you. So all the best. Stay safe. We'll see you next Sunday.
Thank you, Mike. Thank
See ya.
you, Charity. Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.